Welcome back. What I want to do in this lecture is to look at the person of Aristotle, and in particular, his Nicomachean Ethics. For this week's reading, there was an excerpt in the textbook from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics that deals with virtue, the human good, and various other concepts related to those. So I think it's appropriate here that we delve a little deeper into Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics. Aristotle is one of the most famous of all ancient or classical philosophers. He's Plato's most famous student. He studied under Plato at the academy, and then for various reasons, he started his own school at the Lyceum. But Aristotle was a polymath. He wrote extensively on natural science, metaphysics, his ethics, which we're going to talk about here right now, but also on politics, rhetoric, logic, etc. When it comes to philosophy, he is clearly one of the great philosophers of all time. Um, and I think if you just look at the breadth of his studies, whether it's science, metaphysics, ethics, it should be clear how important Aristotle is in the history and development of philosophy. Aristotle's ideas would go on to influence medieval philosophy and even modern philosophy to the point where the moderns um, attempted to break away from the Aristotelian philosophy that had come to dominate the various universities throughout Europe. Okay, so even the moderns, starting with Descartes, look to Aristotle and or look to Aristotle as a way to break away from him and to start a new philosophy. Okay, so even the moderns themselves really couldn't escape the influence of Aristotle. They had to deal with him, whether it's Descartes or Hobbes or many other of the great modern thinkers who we'll be looking at throughout this course. Okay, so let's first note here Aristotle's division of the sciences. Notice here I got it broken down into three different categories: theoretical sciences, the practical sciences, and the productive sciences. So each of these different divisions for Aristotle has different subject matters, and ultimately the end goal of these subject matters will be different depending on whether we're talking about theoretical sciences or the practical sciences or the productive. So let's take theoretical real quick. Metaphysics and logic. For Aristotle, these pursuits, metaphysics and logic, or the theoretical sciences, are pursued simply for knowledge itself. He thinks we don't study metaphysics in order to be able to produce something or to make something or in order for it to benefit us practically in some way. Okay, we're really pursuing this knowledge for its own sake, simply to know itself. And for Aristotle, the theoretical sciences are the highest sciences because they're really not a means to an end. We pursue them for their own sake. They're also the higher sciences, he thinks, because the objects of these sciences are permanent and are not subject to change. Okay, so we'll talk more about Aristotle's metaphysics once we get to our unit on metaphysics. For now, though, just note that Aristotle distinguishes theoretical sciences from the practical sciences. And it's really the practical sciences that concern us here in this lecture. So note that Aristotle includes under the practical sciences ethics and politics. And in contrast to the theoretical sciences, the type of knowledge associated with ethics and politics can be otherwise. So knowledge of things that can be otherwise. In other words, knowledge here is directed toward action. It's directed towards something else. Knowledge just isn't pursued for its own sake like it is in the theoretical sciences. Okay, so we're going to see how this comes together as we proceed throughout this lecture. But for Aristotle, ethics is an inexact science. So let me just say that again. For Aristotle, ethics is an inexact science. And what he means by that, and he repeats this over and over throughout Book 1 of his Nicomachean Ethics, is that ethics isn't like mathematics. So in mathematics, we can achieve certainty, right? We know that 2 plus 2 equals 4. Ethics, on the other hand, because it deals with the human affairs, will be more variable. And we'll see how this applies to his virtues here as we go along. But we're not going to be able to achieve the same certainty that we can in mathematics or logic when we're approaching ethics or politics. And finally, the productive sciences. Think of something like carpentry or pottery. And the end goal is really to make or to produce something. Okay, so think of the productive sciences as a trade or a skill that someone would acquire, right? How to be a good carpenter, or how to be a good potter. Well, the end goal there is, in the case of carpentry, being able to build things. Or in the case of pottery, being able to make things. Okay? So when we're dealing with the ethics, which is what we're going to be dealing with here, we want to keep in mind that the knowledge associated with it is always directed toward action, right? And the object of the knowledge will not be the type of certainty that we achieve in logic or mathematics. It's common to hear Aristotle's ethics referred to as virtue ethics. And after all, it does make sense because Aristotle spends a lot of time in his ethics talking about virtue, both the moral virtues and the intellectual virtues. Virtue ethics, we can say, focuses on the character of the person. In contrast to other ethical theories, such as Kant's moral theory, which is known as deontology, or John Stuart Mill's utilitarianism, which is a form of consequentialism, virtue ethics is all about the character of the person. The aim of virtue ethics is not so much about rules or even consequences, as in the case of utilitarianism, but it's more about character formation. How do we develop our character so that we instinctively and naturally do the right thing in the right way at the right time and for the right reasons? Okay, so next week we'll be looking at, in greater detail, Kant's ethical theory known as deontology and Mill's utilitarianism. But the focus for today will be on virtue ethics, which is all about the character of the moral agent. And really the goal here for Aristotle and virtue ethics, broadly speaking, is to develop the type of character so that we're instinctively going to do what's right. So we don't have to, give a lot of thought to what we're going to do. We're confronted with a situation, and I'm not saying we won't think about it, but we're just going to instinctively do the right thing. Okay, so really what they're getting at here is that being rather than doing is what's important. Okay, so if we develop that right character, good actions are going to flow from that character. Okay, so moral action will stem from the character of the person. So it's not so much about following a rigid set of rules or following religious commandments, for example, but it's about forming our character. Okay, so we habitually act a certain way. Okay, I think it's appropriate to quote the opening couple sentences from Aristotle's Nicomachean Ethics.